Hello everyone. Today we're going to go through a tutorial to create a sunburst style skills matrix diagram like you see here. If you haven't read the Medium article that's linked to in the description, you should probably do that. It kind of goes through a lot of the why around why we wanted to create this and what value we get out of it. Obviously, the first thing that you're going to need to do before you can create a skills matrix is to actually have a list of skills that you can use to put into the matrix. And to do that, we run a workshop where we actually grab all of the employees for a particular role and we ask them to describe what are the skills that they feel like are necessary for their role. Now, that can be done by, you can either read the Medium article for that, or you can just go ahead and grab the Figma file template from Figma. So if you go to the community section and you search for skill matrix template, you'll find it. And when you do, you can download it or duplicate it. And the very first page is a set of instructions. And in here, we also describe exactly how to run the workshop, how to aggregate the results. And once you've done all of that, you should end up with something that looks similar to this, where it's basically a list of all of the skills. You can see across the top here. So for this particular role, this is for a designer role. We've got categories of skills along the top, and then these are sort of the role level or skill level for this particular role, which is the designer. So we've got junior, senior, lead, and principal. And so all of the skills are sort of bucketed in this way. And then when they're grouped like this, we can then use these to go ahead and create the skills matrix. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a frame, and that frame needs to be a specific size. It needs to be 1564 by 1564. And the reason for that is because that is the exact size of the template that we've created in the design system. And so by having everything be the exact same size, that will allow everything to align exactly. And that's really critical to make sure that, because we're using circles and ellipses, that everything will align. Otherwise, it will immediately start to look off. So then you can see, well, we can add next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a skill slice to it from the design system, and then we're just going to duplicate that a bunch of times, 4 times actually, and each time we're going to select one of the variants. So there's 4 different variants, one for each of the levels that we have, and then we're going to draw out. We're just going to drag those out with the sweep part of the tool of the circle, and then that's just going to essentially give us a baseline or a placement. So the first part of this is to put all of the skills themselves loosely into the diagram, because once we start creating those little slices, trying to rearrange them can be a little bit tedious, and so it helps to try to get them as organized as possible initially. So first we're going to take all of our groupings, and we're just going to sort of loosely place them around the circle, and then we're going to try to allocate to them as much space as we have skills for them. So leadership and tech kind of had the fewest amount of skills, so we'll give them maybe a little bit less room. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take the line tool and we're just going to create some lines, and that's just going to give us some rough boundaries. We're going to delete these lines later, but it will give us at least a sense of where the breaks in the each of the sections will be. So now I'm just going to drag out these lines. And then once we have these lines sort of roughly how we think they're going to be, then the next step is to go through our skills, however you have them. Obviously, we're big fans of Figma, and so we did our skills in FigJam, and then we're just going to go ahead and copy the actual text of the skills that we picked in our workshop, and we're going to place them. So we're going to take one group at a time. And then first, I need to just resize them. There's a skill matrix label that we can use, which kind of resizes chooses an appropriate font that we did some user testing to make sure we picked a font that was easy to read, so that when we're trying to view the entire matrix at once, we can read each of the skills. So I'm just going to place these in roughly where I think they're going to go. And then I'm just going to sort of resize them a little bit to make sure that they kind of fit in the little boundary of that particular skill level. And so once I've got all of these kind of roughly placed, now a typical sunburst diagram obviously is supposed to be built from the inside out, and so that the outside chunks that are related to the inner chunks are related. This isn't necessarily has to be that way. In this example, storytelling is our core part of communication, and everything else loosely relates to that. But it doesn't have to be that way, but it just happens to work out nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing this for all of these skills here. So I'm going to fast forward through this, and then when we're done, we'll come back and show how to actually create the individual little pie slices. Okay, now that we've got everything sort of laid out real sort of roughly here, the next thing we're gonna do is we've got all of our labels here. And you see how they're obviously, because it's a single text label, the text label has the label in Figma of the actual text, which is super helpful. So I'm just gonna first start by putting those all into a group, and I'm just gonna lock that group. And that's just because that way I don't accidentally grab and move them, and because that can be kind of frustrating. So now the next thing is, let's start by we've kind of got things figured out roughly here, how we're going to put them. So let's start by putting those background slices in. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a background slice asset. I'm going to drag it into my frame here. And then everything is just going to always be aligned at 0, 0. And so now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and move that to the background using, Command Alt and left bracket. And you can see that there it is. We've got this guy here, and we've got the other part, which is now sitting behind it. So I'm going to take these other skill slices, and I'm actually going to, I'm just going to hide them for the moment. We're going to come back to these guys in a little bit, but just to make it a little easier to see what we're doing here. So you can see that it's not quite aligned the way the original thing is set up. So I have it set to start at 0, like this particular piece is always going to start at 0, but we can go ahead and move that. So we can just go ahead and grab the start of it, and we can kind of move it up roughly to where we want it. And now to keep everything aligned, so this one you can see it's easy to use you've got the little drag tool, but you can also use the actual values here. So this one starts at -9, but you can see actually it starts at -8.96. So I'm going to grab this piece, and I'm just going to make that align with it, 8.96. And now those two things are perfectly aligned. So now that I've got that one, I'm just going to go ahead and do this for the other ones as well. So I just duplicated it. Now I'm just going to sort of command click. Command clicking or alt clicking if you're on Windows is definitely the easiest way to select things, because there's going to be, at the end of this, there's going to be multiple layers on top of each other, and being able to command click. You can also go into outline mode if you want. That can be helpful too. So now I'm just going to sort of align this one sort of with the edge here, and you can see that this is where the lines that we put in here aren't necessarily going to be needed now that we've got this going. So I'm just going to delete that one as I go here. And I'm going to, again, take this one since it's part of that duplicate one, and I'll get this. In order to make it look like, because it's a circle, there's always going to be a wider gap at the top of it than there is at the bottom of it, just because of that's how a circle works. So it helps to try to get it as kind of as close as possible without touching. And then, so that one is at -54. So then we're going to move this one to be -54 as well. And that's just going to keep that boundary. You can see it still has a little bit of that sort of, I don't know, toothpick effect maybe. But it still, it looks good. So it's really is kind of as good as you can get without trying to like go crazy with it. Now I'm going to sweep this one out to try to cover this here, and then again this sweep here is -17.7, and so I'm going to set this sweep for the top portion to -17.7, and I'm going to talk about what this top portion is for in a little bit as we get a little bit further into this. So I've got that, and now that we're creating these, it will help to also keep these sort of named appropriately. Otherwise, you're going to have so many, it's going to be really hard to kind of tell what's going on. So I'm going to take this first one. This one was mobile, and I'm just going to rename this to mobile. And then I'm going to rename this one to base. And then I'm just going to, again, I'm going to duplicate this. I'm just going to go ahead and rename it to apply, because I know that's what I'm going to use next. Command clicking, moving this over. I'm going to get rid of this line here. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here, command clicking, whoops. And accidentally doing that is just par for the course. All right, so now I'm going to get kind of in close here, try to get this as close as possible. And that starts at minus 118.2. So we're going to do the same thing for this one. Start this wedge at, whoops, minus 118.2, not 118.2. Boom, there we go. Okay, so again, I'm going to sort of fast forward through this as I finish building these out, and then we'll come back and show you what to do next. So now that we've got that done, you can see that I've left a bit of a bigger gap here on the left-hand side. And the reason for that is if we go over and sort of look at our reference diagram here, our reference skills matrix, you can see that I needed a place to put the actual labels themselves for each of the rings. We divided ours up into sort of the craft skills or the hard skills and the soft skills. Maybe you didn't want to do that, or yours doesn't work out that way. But, you know, that's fine. It doesn't have to be that way. That was just happened to be a nice something nice that actually kind of divided ours in half. But like in this case, this one didn't quite work out that way, and maybe the soft skills are actually for, you know, certain jobs, soft skills might be like almost all of it. So anyways, we do need a spot to put those labels, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to take this label here, and I'm just going to go ahead and rename it to some labels here, and then we'll rearrange them so they're in the perfect spot in just a little bit here. But I just want a quick placement of these, just so I have them. And then we have principal. And the reason I'm doing this is because you can see that if you want the labels to be, I'm just sort of dragging them all out here, and then adjunct. And I'm going to align all of these to make sure they're all aligned to the bottom, like that. Maybe this is a little too big. We're just going to make it a little small. They don't need to be quite so big. And then I'm going to, now that they're all sort of aligned at the bottom, I'm going to put them in. They all aligned at the bottom? Yeah, that's okay. God, it's just like sometimes it's like deceiving. Okay, so I'm going to put them here, and you can see the reason why I want to do this now is because once I start putting all of the little pieces in there, I have to rearrange all of them. Right now, you can see that. See how this one is like a little bit too close. I want to move this. I'm going to move this start down just a little bit, like this, and then I'm going to move this. I'm going to sweep this down just a little, maybe a little bit. You can see it's kind of hard to get that because again, the problem is that the this gap gets bigger toward the end, and so there's really not a good way. Even though it's really tight here, there's a lot of space here, and there isn't going to be a great way. I mean, you could make these like be angled if you want. That could be one way of doing it, right? Like something like that, I suppose. And then it would kind of fit better. The approach that I took was to try to just make this be as sort of as tight as possible with it. So now that I moved this one a little bit, I moved the start, so now I have to move this start so that they are aligned. And now you can see the problem is once you move the start of something, you can see how now the sweep is now off. Like this sweep now needs to be opened up just a little bit. So we have that gap there. And then same with this one. We need to open this one up, just need to change the sweep. And so that's why it's really important to get to get everything kind of aligned initially before you start putting all the little slices in there. Because otherwise you have to do that for every single slice that you have in there. Okay, so now I've got that sort of, and again, it just looks so deceiving. Like I know they're aligned, but it doesn't look like it. Maybe they weren't aligned. Maybe I misaligned them on accident. All right, let's just realign them. Good enough. So now we're going to go through and actually start putting all of the little slices in here. Now that we have the basis sort of laid out here. So I put my fresh slice in here. It's obviously way off, so I'm going to put this back to 0, 0, where it needs to be. And now that I have my first slice in here, I'm going to actually take my group of labels. I'm going to take these outer labels. I'm going to group these. Actually, I'm just going to group all of these labels together. So I've got this first slice here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the core. So I'm going to select my core variant, and now I'm just going to sort of drag this up to match. And of course, I could look at this background slice and say it's minus 8.96 start. So I can take this one and I can say minus 8.96 to start. And then for the sweep, I'm just going to sweep it out enough so that it covers that label. And that's it. And then I'm just going to try to, roughly pick a halfway point in there. And then this skill slice is web design. Actually, it'll help to have them named with the actual main category. So I'm going to call this core web design. And that will become useful later. So now that we've got that one, now I'm going to do the next one. So I'm going to duplicate core web design. I'm going to rename this to core iOS HIG. We do a lot of iOS work, and so I want to make sure that's one of our core skills that our designers need to know. So now that I've got that one, I'm going to take this and I'm again going to start this. Now, in order to keep all of these aligned, one of the things that we built into the design system that helps us here is if we actually click on the slice itself, and we can turn on this little toggle called spacer. And what you can see a spacer does is it gives us this little guy here. And this little yellow bar is the spacer that will keep all of these slices the exact same distance apart. And so in this case, you're never going to change the sweep. You're always just going to drag this out, and you're just going to put it right on the edge there, like that. And in fact, what I probably should do is rename this to be, this is core spacer. And now I'll go back and duplicate my core web design and rename it to core iOS HIG. And now when I take this and I sweep it out, or change the start, I should say, I can zoom in real close. I can put this right on the edge here like that. And now I've got that one done. I can just bring this back. Now the sweep here, so I'm going to sweep this out so it lines up here, right? So kind of right on the edge there, minus 5.5. But of course, that sweep isn't going to line up with this sweep because it's a different slice. It's a different piece of the pie, basically. And so really, I haven't found a good way to do this other than just kind of getting in close and trying to make them visually as close as possible. And then you can see these labels aren't quite in the right spot, but that's okay. We'll go back and we'll clean all that up. So that's the first one. I'm going to do one more here, and then I will fast forward. So first, let me just do one more. So this is going to be, I'm going to duplicate core iOS HIG, and now we're going to get into the base stuff. So now I'm going to rename this one to be base design theory. And then because this one doesn't need, because this design theory is the only skill in this, I don't need the spacer. So I'm just going to drag this out to here. Now in this case, I can use the same start value. So if I click on this, and I can see the start is minus 17.4. Actually, is that going to work? What does this start? Sorry, minus 54. I looked at the wrong value. Minus 54 exactly. So minus 54, and there we go. And that'll line up perfectly. And then because this particular slice does go edge to edge, we can actually use the same sweep value here of minus 17.74. And that will sweep it out exactly to the same width as the background. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to duplicate that again. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to finish all of these. And then when I'm done with all of the core ones, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the next level. Let's just do the next level real quick so you can see how this works. I'm going to take my core web design, I'm going to duplicate it. And that should have actually not been core, that should have been mobile. So I apologize for that. Let me rename those. That should have been mobile. And this should have been mobile. And this should have been mobile. So I'm going to take this other one, and I'm actually going to change it from core to senior, and that's going to give it the sort of blue slice here. And then again, I can move it up. I can put it right where I want it, and then I'm going to go through and finish doing all of these. So let me go ahead and fast forward through that. Our skill matrix at this point is basically done. So as you can see here, what we've done is we've got the labels, all of the labels themselves for the skills in a single frame. The spacers are just hidden. The slices, which are the sort of the colored portions, are in a frame. And then all of the labels for the categories for the skills, and then the colored for the background slices are all in their own frames and sort of sitting below everything. That's basically it. The real thing, the thing to remember here is to keep the skill labels, these labels here themselves, in a frame that's sort of on top of everything. Because if you ever want to combine multiple matrices together and see the combined skill sets of multiple people, it'll be important to have the labels sort of sitting on top of everything. So then at this point, what we can do is we can simply create a component out of that, and we'll just call this our skill matrix template. And since this was a designer sample, we'll call this designer. And then to use it, you would simply make a copy or an instance of that component, and then you can just simply command click into each one of the things of the skills, and then you just use the color style to select their proficiency. So for example, here, if they have no proficiency, you can just use the unrated skill or the unrated proficiency, and you can just go through, and as you're having your conversation with them or rating them, you can be selecting what their proficiency level is. And as you can see, the proficiencies are have opacity to them, so they're sort of transparent, and that's what makes the stacking work. So as they stack up, that transparency sort of starts to add up. The one thing we didn't cover was the adjunct skills, and adjunct skills are basically done the same way. You simply take an existing skill, or you can add it in, and you simply select the adjunct setting, and then from here you can simply again move it to wherever you want in the place, and then you just add it and add the skill label. And for those, you know, if you're going to try to stack these, it'll be kind of important to have, since these can kind of be anything that you want to track. It's important to try to not have them stack up with other people unless they also have that skill as well. Okay, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing if anybody finds this useful in the comments.